Hello, I'm Bill Everett, and on behalf of the Friends of Chamber Music, welcome to this episode of Chamber Conversations, chamber music during La Belle Époque. La Belle Époque, or the Beautiful Epoch, is a name given to the period in French history that lasted from about 1880 to the outbreak of World War I in 1914. It is characterized by a sense of optimism taking place alongside notable innovations in science and technology. The arts were flourishing, and new forms of expression were being cultivated not only in music, but also in literature and the visual arts. A symbiosis of sorts existed between these forms, sometimes accompanied by tensions between what was considered new and what was considered very new. In this episode, we'll explore some of the new directions being forged in French chamber music during La Belle Époque. Composers at the time were searching for ways to create something distinctively French in an instrumental medium dominated by a German mindset. The piano holds a place of special significance in this repertoire. The Industrial Revolution and the technological advances that continued throughout the 19th century affected the manufacturing of pianos, especially in Paris. French piano manufacturers such as Pleyel and Everett made instruments that showcased these latest developments. Thanks also to technology, they were able to produce huge numbers of instruments intended for domestic use. Importantly, these were affordable to middle-class consumers. Indeed, the piano began to be seen as a symbol of middle-class life in France, as well as in England. Factories were also producing bigger and more adept instruments intended for concert halls. With this increase in actual pianos in France, it is not all that surprising that the piano began to figure more prominently in French chamber music of the time. In 1871, Camille Saint-Saens and César Franck established the Société Nationale de Musique, the National Society of Music, with the expressed goal of providing a space for the nurture and performance of French instrumental music, especially chamber music. At the time, French composers were often thought of as only being able to write operas. Instrumental music was considered a predominantly German art form, and the members of the National Society were wanting to challenge this German hegemony. They wanted to prove that French composers could do more than write for the operatic stage, and that they too could create string quartets, piano trios, and the like. The Society presented many premieres, not all of which had brilliant performances. In fact, some works were being sight-read. That is, the performers were seeing the music for the very first time during the actual concert. One major challenge these French composers faced was determining what French music should be. And this is where, not surprisingly, fierce debates and palpable fissures erupted. At first, Saint-Saens led the society. Camille Saint-Saens was not afraid to tell people how he felt about the music of the Society's co-founder, César Franck. He really didn't like it. This difference in artistic preference was actually a strength of the Society, for it allowed multiple and divergent musical approaches to be heard on Society programs, rather than promoting only one vision of what French music could and should be. Saint-Saens' taste veered towards the conservative, while Franck was willing to take musical risks in terms of the overall length of pieces. A more chromatic harmonic language, that is, using the black keys of the piano as much as the white ones, and creating densely packed textures. Saint-Saens was a great fan of Mozart, and he emulated the Viennese classicists' textual clarity and musical equilibrium in his own work. A sense of order and balance is paramount, as is evident in this short excerpt from the second movement of Saint-Saens' first piano trio. By contrast, César Franck's music is filled with dynamic passages of intense restlessness. Franck often constructs his music from small building blocks or motifs, which he then combines and morphs into larger musical utterances. He also evokes what is called cyclic form, where a recognizable yet transformed version of the same melodic idea occurs in several movements of a work, often in all of them. These notions of motivic germination and cyclic treatment, while not invented by Franck, became identifiable features of French music. Lest we forget that these traits were not the exclusive property of French composers, one didn't have to be French to bring back themes from one movement in another. In fact, Johannes Brahms does this in his Third Symphony, the final movement of which ends with a transfigured version of the first movement's opening gesture. Several of Franck's chamber music compositions were featured on society concerts, including the Piano Quintet, the Sonata for violin and piano, and the String Quartet. The Piano Quintet, scored for piano and standard string quartet, 2 violins, viola, and cello, had its first performance on January 17, 1880, at one of the Society's concerts. In this excerpt from the first movement, it will be evident why the piece was described as tumultuous, especially when considering the difficulty of the piano part. The pianist at the first performance was none other than Camille Saint-Saens, the leader of the society at the time, whose conservative musical leanings were well known. After the performance, which was a success, Franck enthusiastically and sincerely approached Saint-Saens backstage to thank him for his fine playing. He continued by telling Saint-Saens that he wanted to dedicate the quintet to him, which he did. Franck then handed Saint-Saens the original manuscript of the Piano Quintet. As the story goes, and it was corroborated by several people who were there, Saint-Saens responded to Franck's generous gesture by making a face, throwing the manuscript on the piano, turning his back on Franck, and walking away. Later, Saint-Saens said he hated the passionate warmth of the quintet. César Franck was not the only composer to be on the receiving end of Saint-Saens's vitriol. Saint-Saens said the following about Claude Debussy, quote, "We must at all costs bar the door of the Institute against a man capable of such atrocities, fit to be placed beside Cubist paintings," end quote. Such atrocities, as Saint-Saens called them, are now accepted hallmarks of modernism in which realism can be suspended in favor of artistic vision. Claude Debussy wrote only a handful of chamber music works, and when he did, he preferred to write for mixed ensembles. This was because of the nature and uniqueness of the sounds that could emerge from combining instruments of different families, or ones whose sound is produced in different ways. For example, a flute, a viola, and a harp. An exception to these mixed ensembles is the String Quartet from 1893. This is no ordinary string quartet, for its sounds transcend what one may expect from the traditional combination of 2 violins, viola, and cello. Debussy's String Quartet had its premiere by the Assez Quartet, led by the esteemed violinist Eugène Assez, on a society concert in Paris on December 29, 1893. The 4-movement work follows the French practices that we discussed earlier in the context of César Franck. Small musical ideas grow into larger scale structures that live both within and among the individual movements. In a moment, we'll be hearing a performance by the Parker Quartet of the 2nd movement of Debussy's String Quartet. This movement demonstrates the possibilities of sounds that can be produced by 4 string instruments. At the opening, for example, there's a bowed melody in the viola that takes place above pizzicatos, that is, plucking the strings, in the other three instruments. This passage, not incidentally, is a transformation of the opening motive of the first movement, cyclic form. It contains the core musical essence that will return in various guises throughout this movement. The distinctive percussive sound of the pizzicato passages and the repeated rhythmic figures show the influence of Javanese gamelan, an indigenous orchestra of tuned percussion instruments that Debussy heard at the 1889 Paris Exposition. And if this isn't enough, Debussy also explores the sonic effects of creating undulating figures to support a sustained melody. This movement truly reflects a remarkable and highly original concept of sound. The following year, Debussy had his first big public success with the premiere of Prelude to the Afternoon of a Faun, and he didn't return to chamber music until much later in life, when he embarked on a series of 6 sonatas for various combinations of instruments. Alas, he never completed the set. But one of the sonatas that he did complete is a sonata for flute, viola, and harp from 1915. It was originally to be scored for flute, oboe, and harp, but Debussy replaced the oboe with the viola to offer more timbral possibilities. The viola could match the flute when played with a bow, and the harp when plucked. The opening movement, Pastorale, reflects the ethereal atmospheres so often associated with Debussy. Many different iterations of French music existed during La Belle Epoque. Another significant composer of the time was Gabriel Faure, who studied with Camille Saint-Saens and emulated his teacher's fondness for transparent textures in his own work. Faure was also interested in plain chant and was known for his exceptional abilities to improvise at the organ. He enjoyed a significant career as a church musician, and in 1905, he was appointed director of the Paris Conservatoire. Faure wrote 10 major chamber works in every standard genre for strings and piano. His single String Quartet is his only chamber work not to include piano. One of Faure's most popular works is his first piano quartet, scored for piano, violin, viola, and cello. The quartet had its premiere on a society concert on February 14, 1880, with Faure himself playing piano. In 4 movements, it is filled with Faure's characteristic long cantabile or singing melodic lines. The influence of medieval plain chant, which consists of a single melodic line that unfolds along a temporal expanse, is an essential element of Faure's style. Here's the exquisite ending of the first movement. Saint-Saens taught Faure, and Faure taught the final composer to be featured in this episode, Maurice Ravel. So we have 3 generations of composers represented here: Saint-Saens, Faure, and Ravel. Ravel possessed an exceptional ability to cultivate and combine many of the different musical trends in vogue at the time. In doing so, he brought together styles that range from cubist-like fracturings to jazz. Ravel was very concerned about maintaining a proper, dignified physical appearance. His friend, the pianist Ricardo Viñas, said this was a mask, for Ravel was attracted to all that was, quote, poetry, fantasy, precious and rare, paradoxical and refined, end quote. These traits infuse Ravel's Piano Trio in A minor from 1914. In 4 movements, it had its premiere on January 28, 1915, at a Red Cross benefit concert in Paris. This concert appeared under the auspices of the new Independent Music Society, which Faure, Ravel, and others founded in 1910 when they thought that the older National Society was becoming too conservative and too dedicated to César Franck. Remember that Franck had once been thought of as being too progressive for Saint-Saens, and now it was Saint-Saens' lineage who were calling Franck old-fashioned. In the Piano Trio, Ravel found a creative and effective solution to the dilemma of how to create balance between the piano and the string instruments. Especially with the advances in piano technology, it would be all too easy for the piano to overpower the violin and the cello. Ravel, as a supremely talented orchestrator, applied the principles of writing for orchestra to the genre of the piano trio. Basically, he kept the three instruments out of each other's ranges so that they each could be heard. This meant that Ravel wrote extremely high at times for the violin and the cello, or sometimes he had the piano play very high and very low, avoiding the middle part of the keyboard and leaving that part of the sonic spectrum open for the cello and the violin. Ravel also calls for harmonics in the string instruments, that is, touching the string rather than firmly placing the finger on the string, to create sonorous effects that could be heard over the piano because of their specific acoustical properties. The overall effect is a kaleidoscope of splendid instrumental colors. Each movement of the piano trio is highly distinctive. We'll be watching a performance of the first movement momentarily. It is, according to Ravel himself, a zortico, a Basque dance consisting of rhythmic groupings of 3 plus 2 plus 3, d dot dot d dot d dot dum, b dot dot d dot d dot dum. Ravel's mother was from the Basque country, and Basque elements often appear in Ravel's music. This 3 plus 2 plus 3 grouping, d dot dot d dot d dot dot d dot dot d dot d dot dum, includes more inherent energy than the more standard grouping of 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2, dot 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 dot. The alternating groupings subtly evoke the aural atmosphere of a folk dance. Here's the Gryphon Trio to perform the first movement of Ravel's piano trio. La Belle Époque, the beautiful epoch, is a term appropriate not just for French history and culture in general from roughly 1880 to World War I, but also specifically for the music of that time. Composers were exploring their own ideas of what this beautiful French music could be, and the results, as we've been hearing, are captivating in their individuality. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Chamber Conversations, chamber music during La Belle Époque. Until next time.